Welcome to another episode of the Amplify podcast. I'm John Templeton, and joining me today is Dr. Theresa Bullard. Dr. Theresa Bullard is a PhD physicist and the host of Mystery Teachings on Gaia TV. She's an international spiritual teacher with the Modern Mystery School. She merges science, ancient wisdom, and powerful time-tested techniques for harnessing consciousness. Dr. Theresa Bullard, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So me too. Like I really, I've watched you on Mystery Teachings, and I've stalked you on Instagram. And I watched an episode actually where you were interviewed, and your life is not a normal life. I mean, you studied so many things. How does one end up as a spiritual teacher on Gaia, on Mystery Teachings? How does one get there?
Wow. Well, I would say it was synchronicity that guided me every step of the way. The universe at some level had a plan, but I had to also be ready to step into that plan. So, I was first pursuing my PhD in physics and planning to become a research scientist. But then in the process of that, I realized, oh, this isn't actually fulfilling me. And I felt like something really important was missing. And I found myself rather out of balance by immersing myself into 80 hours of left brain physics type stuff per week. And after, about a year and then another year, a couple of years in, I was just like, all right, something's really got to give here. And I need to find what's going to bring that sense of balance and meaning and well-being back into my life. And I kind of just stumbled on it was spirituality was the key, because I brought back in all these different aspects I'd had prior, like athletics and social time and creative hobbies and more diversity in my life, and it all helped create greater sense of like, okay, well, I feel better, but there's still something key to my sense of joy and purpose and meaning that was missing, and spirituality ended up being the key ingredient. And so then when I dove into pursuing this spiritual, it was like anything I was going to believe spiritually had to complement what I knew to be true scientifically. It couldn't negate or conflict, because I was just far too educated and far too deep in my thought processes to just go on blind faith or dogma. So I dove into all this intersection between science and consciousness, science and spirituality, where like Eastern philosophy meets quantum physics and things like that. And I got really excited. It lit the spark. It lit that sense of passion and like awe, at how amazing it is that these ancient spiritual teachings have had these concepts. It may be in a metaphorical language, but they've had these concepts for thousands of years. And now our modern science is just starting to come around to it with a mathematical understanding and a more practical, grounded understanding. And so then I really wanted to merge the two together. Like, how can we take this further, not just from a philosophical perspective, but how can we apply it? How can we make it practical? And so that's when I then ended up putting, in a way, I just put a request out to the universe, like, help me find my path, help me find my spiritual community, the people that'll resonate at that same wavelength, and in a way that I can really start to bridge the science with the spiritual, and in a practical way where it really makes a difference, where we can apply it in our life. And then synchronicity just led me to somebody associated with the Modern Mystery School. And that was then my introduction into things like sacred geometry and Hermetic teachings and alchemy and just the Western path, a Kabbalah, that really I found was they're spiritual, but in a scientific way. So they really dig deep into these questions about why and what's the purpose and what about that, and where do we fit into the whole thing, and it was much more really, really deep and also very scientific in their way of thinking. So it fit with a scientific way. It fit with a Western way of thinking versus just the Eastern philosophies, which can sometimes be very beautiful, but very Zen, very like koans, they're kind of paradoxical to us at times. And then what really impressed me was the tools, the very practical exercises and tools and applications, so that it wasn't just about knowledge, it was about here's how to live this, right? Here's how to apply this in your life, and then see for yourself those transformations. And I did. I saw so much transformation in my life. And then it really transformed my course to where I wanted to help teach this stuff, because I saw the difference it made in people's lives.
Yeah, wow. And so going from science, I'm guessing like a little geeky girl maybe, and who was really, oh, you into sports as well,
I was into
but
sports. I was more of an athlete than a geek,
okay.
but I was smart. So
Intellectual, is that a better word?
intellectual, yeah, yeah,
Intellectual.
definitely.
To transition from intellect, because I meet a lot of science-based people now, and it's almost like their intellect is their downfall. It's almost like that's what's actually blocking this spiritual side in, because maybe they can't make sense of it. What's been your understanding there?
It's a good observation, because if we get too analytical about everything, then something spiritual or intuitive might happen, but our analytical mind tries to rationalize it away or dismiss it. And so what I found as I was getting deeper and deeper into my physics training is that we were almost programmed to be more and more skeptical about things, and to the point where also your credibility is everything. And if you start believing in spiritual or woo-woo kind of stuff, you're going to lose your credibility over here in the scientific field. And so often it's not that spirituality and science don't blend, it's more that there's a social stigma within the scientific community that threatens your credibility if you believe in something non-physical. And so that, I think, is more of a political, social kind of peer pressure type thing. And it's there's a strong, very vocal group of atheistic scientists, but there is just also as many who do believe in spirit. They just don't talk about it as much, or they feel like they can't say much about it, so they're going to talk about what they know and what they feel they can very groundedly say something about, versus just hypothesize. But when you go back just 100 years to the time when the most brilliant minds on the planet were discovering quantum physics, these very spiritual concepts were brought into the conversation very actively by people like Einstein and Pauli and Bohr. They were really discussing all of this. But then materialists kind of came in again and just said, let's just get back to the business of science and technology and what we can say for sure something about, what we know how to control, and just kind of leave this philosophical conversation to the side. So it's not that they don't agree, it's just there's a challenge there. And so I think with people who are scientific and analytical and intellectual about things, one of the things I had to learn, I had my skepticism challenged a lot. And at the same time, I always had the advantage of having a little bit of an intuitive side to me. I grew up with parents, like especially a mother who is very intuitive and very into sort of metaphysical stuff, and then on the other side, my dad was very grounded, and so I had this sort of contrast of the two approaches from my upbringing, anyways. So it was always sort of a possibility for me. So that helped, but I did learn that I had to catch myself when an intuitive thought would come forward, maybe some spiritual guidance or insight or some intuitive thought would come forward, but it wouldn't compute with my logic. And my left brain or my logical side would just say, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would you do that? Or why would you think about that? And it would just kind of dismiss it away. And then I realized, though, that those intuitive hits were accurate. And so I had all these little examples of things, like just something silly like, oh, you need to take your credit card into the chiropractor today. And then my other side would be like, well, that's ridiculous because my credit card's on file with the chiropractor. Why would I take it in? And then I go into the chiropractor and they're like, oh, your credit card expired. We need your credit card.
Yeah.
So I had all these like little opportunities to see how my rational mind was dismissing my intuitive. And then I started to challenge myself to open up more and listen to that intuitive voice and to catch it when I was dismissing it. And then just ask, well, what's the harm in seeing if this is true or not true, right? So let's
Mm.
just follow this and see where it goes. If there's no harm in following it, let's just give it a shot. And then I started listening more and more, and it opened up to that much more intuitive side. But I had to let go of some of that, not discernment, right? There's a difference between skepticism and discernment. So we have to always be discerning, but you also have to have an open mind, rather than this sort of skeptical bias. And it was an unprogramming and a reprogramming process that I had to go through.
Yeah, I love that. And because you understand the science, can you scientifically back up what is happening at that intuitive level, or is that not happened yet?
Oh yeah, sure. So your right brain, for example, works about 800 times faster than your left brain.
Mm-hmm.
And just one example, right? I mean, it can be brought down to the brain, not that consciousness is within the brain. I don't believe that, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like our brain is our computer processor for
Mm-hmm.
our consciousness and the stimulus that we're receiving. And so the right hemisphere is actually operating faster and more non-linearly than the left hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And so the left hemisphere tends to be our logical, rational, put everything in boxes, language oriented, numbers oriented kind of side. And then our right brain tends to be more gestalt, more creative, more intuitive, more relationship oriented, more feeling oriented. And it's the right brain is also the gateway to the limbic system, and then to the old brain and so forth, where you really get more of the intuitive senses, like the extrasensory perceptions start coming through more from the old brain, or just as an example, like tingles on the back of your neck, or the little heart palpitation, or a shift in your breathing. Like those are what we would call somatic body experiences
Mm-hmm.
that are controlled by the old brain. For most people, they're unconscious of what's going on at that level, but I have found that you can get more and more conscious of more. It's really just a matter of paying attention to and becoming more aware of those deep somatic system responses, which are indicators of things you need to be paying attention to in your environment, in your field. At a spiritual level, it can come through. So I think there's a very neurological, brain-oriented explanation for how intuition and spiritual experiences, things like meditation, visions, the feelings you get in Cheeto. Yeah, go ahead.
Who told you to bring the credit card? Like, where
did that come from?
Yeah, where did that? Is there a future you? Is time non-linear? So it's like the message is happening at the same time. Is there anything that you could share there?
Could be all of the above, right? It could be we could call it our higher self. We could call it our greater true self, eternal being. So in my mystery teaching series, I talk about the true you. That's sort of like, here we're maybe living almost like a holographic projection from some higher reality. And in that higher reality, our true consciousness, our spirit, our true self really resides at some higher dimension than just this three-dimensional physicality we experience. And that from that place, they're seeing a lot of like parallel lives happening all at once, simultaneously. Time doesn't flow the same way. And so it could be sending in, our higher self could be sending in signals like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. It could also be other, spirit intelligences. I don't think it's just us. I think there are also other spirit intelligences that are operating at many different planes, many different dimensions, not just those who are physically incarnated.
Mm-hmm.
And, they could maybe kind of send signals in through our aura, through our soul, to give us little, it's a lot of it's through thought and ESP.
And to anyone who might be listening and going, this sounds crazy, is there any tangible evidence of like spirit existing? Not the symptoms of it, but like, so like getting a message is kind of like a symptom. Is there anything tangible existence? I'm curious. I have no idea of spirit existing, or other entities. Almost like the way I pictured in my head is, and like us, but vibrating at a different frequency, and so they are just not in our light spectrum, they're not in our hearing spectrum. So it's coming from another being, but they're just at a different vibratory rate. Is there any evidence of that?
Yeah. Well, the challenge is that when you ask for tangible evidence, you're asking for something that fits within the narrow range of our 5 physical senses, right? Which is a really narrow range of sensitivity to see it, feel it, hear it, smell it, touch it, right? And even our scientific detectors, they're focused on particle-oriented tangible things versus maybe a field of consciousness. And so they don't know how to detect it because they're not really opening up to, it's a whole new paradigm way of thinking about things, to start to figure out how do we bridge that gap from the spiritual to the physical to be able to bring that kind of tangible evidence. But there are some who have claimed to capture spirits on camera, for example. I've seen a number of, images where you see orbs, you see, kind of ethereal, floaty looking things that have been captured even on digital cameras, definitely through like Carillion photography. You can capture energy fields, GDV, which is a gas discharge voltage kind of thing that Konstantin Krokov, who is a physicist in Russia, has made. GDV and something they call the Sputnik has also been able to capture spikes in the energy field when consciousness of people comes to a certain level, or something energetically, spiritually shifts within the field. So there is some evidence there, but it's not the kind of evidence you're going to find in like a mainstream physics peer-reviewed journal, because there's just a bias that, like there's actually, there's a really good book by Dean Radin, it's called Real Magic. And he just breaks down, like, here are the evidences of non-local consciousness and ESP. Here's evidence even of, real magic, like from thought to manifestation and how that happens. Here's evidence of, multiple things. And yet he tries to demystify it, simplify it, and so forth. And yet, even though there's very valid research that's been done, it won't get published in the mainstream journals because they just have their biases against it. So they just wave it away as, oh, it's pseudoscience, because it doesn't fit within their paradigms. So
Yeah. And do you think moving forward, it's going to be more accepted, and people are going to start to go, well, look, traditional, I want to call it like traditional physics, this isn't the end, there's got to be more to it. And as time goes on, are people going to reject it more or accept it more, do you think?
Accept or reject more of what? The spiritual side or the traditional science?
The spiritual side.
I think that more and more people are already waking up and starting to gravitate towards more spiritual awareness, or at least consciousness. Maybe it's not spiritual in the sense of some God out there, but maybe it's that we are, that eternal energy and consciousness. And it ultimately comes back down to our own awareness of ourself. And so right now, science itself is being challenged to break out of its box and to, look for new ways of approaching science to bring greater understanding and unified field theories and so forth. So even science is being pushed to make really big creative leaps. And you have more and more scientists who are actually finding, they might have started off atheistic, and then if they keep an open mind, right, without like suspending the bias and just keep an open mind and follow the trail both of logic and data, if they're willing to shift that perspective, they are finding themselves actually going more and more to the idea that consciousness is primary, that the universe is like a great thought more so than a great machine. And so I think more and more it is starting to become accepted. And even when I was in graduate school, it was like, oh, you can't talk about this stuff. But now you have professors at universities in science, physics in particular, who are starting to open up that conversation more. And they're undergraduates and their graduate students, like Z generation, millennial generation, like they're pushing the conversation because they want to know. So I think there is more and more openness coming as it spreads. But I think it's also really important at the same time, which is where I think some scientists tend to go to the other extreme is that, in the New Age, you do have a lot of very loose use of scientific principles, and without, really understanding the deeper aspects of it. And so I think we have to be careful. It's not a New Age thing, but it's also not a just purely materialistic type of thing. Somewhere in the middle, there's room for spiritual and physical to combine together, but from still a scientific approach, or at least a rational kind of cohesive approach, but that allows for that intuitive and that spiritual kind of perspective on things. Just opening the door, just opening up our minds more.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, I came from the military. I was atheist, no God, like, look at the dinosaurs. It was just very, that was my path. And then, like, I'm probably one of the most spiritual people that there are. And what I mean by that, I think everything's spiritual, but I've seen things that you just cannot ever explain with anything. And I'm sure Dr. Joe. I've been through all of his courses and programs, and again, even during those, I've seen things that you just, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so I'm so convinced, and I struggle to not convince other people, but to I want other people to feel the magic, because as a coach, I see a lot of people that are still trying so hard, and they aren't fulfilled. And it sounds similar to your journey. You're like, what's the missing component? And for me, I know what it is. I'm like, it's your spiritual side. Like, get in touch with that. But yeah, I mean, it's not, I guess it's not our job to force them. They have to find out on their own.
True.
But what I want to ask now is, what's the craziest experiment that's happened in the last 100 years or so that has, so it's from a science point of view, but it's almost confused scientists to the point of, wow, there must be something else. I've heard of a few, but I would love to know if there are ones I haven't heard of.
Well, one of the ones I think that's super crazy and perplexing to some, the scientific mindset, at least the old classical viewpoint of the world, was some of the quantum entanglement experiments where it transcended time, not just space, right? So for example, they would take particles like photons or electrons, and then they'd split them. So they'd come from the same source, and then they'd split them and they'd take them in different tracks. And so then in quantum physics, they should be entangled. And for those who don't know, entanglement means it's almost like they're two sides of the same thing. Maybe they seem like they're separated from our perspective in this 3D world, but if you do something to one, it automatically and instantaneously affects the other one. And so they are interlinked, through some quantum space that it transcends our three-dimensional space. And so they took, these particles on different tracks, and then they changed maybe the polarization of one of them, but didn't yet measure it. And then they took and measured the other one at some point, and then later then measured the first one. And then they saw that there was a there was a link, even though they were measured at different times, right? And so it was almost like a future measurement affected something that happened in the past. And not just the past affects the future, but they saw it work the other way as well. So that one was pretty crazy. I mentioned Dean Radin a moment ago. He, through the Institute of Noetic Sciences, they had done some also double slit experiments. And I thought one of them was like, oh my God, that's like a smoking gun kind of result that they just received, where they had people from all over the world would sort of like log into their system, and they'd be told, okay, you're going to focus on, it was a wave particle duality thing, right? So they were setting it up to see I think they were setting it up to see it as waves. And they did not put any detectors on the two slits. And if it goes through the two slits as a wave, they should see an interference pattern, which is typical of wave behavior. But we also know from science that if they set it up a different way, where they put detectors on the two slits to see which slit did it go through, then it changes the behavior on the other side where it shows up as particles. So in this experiment, I believe, if I'm recalling the details right, they instead of putting the detectors on the slits, they said, okay, we're going to detect it as a wave. But then they told the users on the other end to use their consciousness and their intention to force a particle view, to act like they're observing it through the slits, and then they would detect and see what happened on the other side. Now, it wasn't the same for all users. And what they found was that the more experienced they were at meditation, the more they were able to bring their consciousness to a very strong coherence and strong intention when they were then remotely trying to affect the result. And they did. They saw an effect that created particle-like behavior.
Yeah, wow.
And it didn't matter how far away they were. You know, they could have been on the other side of the world. So it showed no non-local consciousness affecting and basically making the quantum potential shift into particle view instead of wave view, even though the physical experiment shouldn't have been able to do that. Now, I think if they took it one step further and they had the users try to sway it going more through the right slit versus the left slit, now they could really show, if it's possible, you know, they could really show how much consciousness could actually direct the wave, not just influence what type of manifestation it is. So yeah, there's some good research that's out there. It's just, again, maybe not as well known, some of it.
Yeah, yeah. And for anybody watching or listening, hop on YouTube and look up double slit experiment. That's where I'd say to start, and this will start making sense. I had some of these questions down to you. One of them was how does something become entangled? And you talked about it at that like really micro level, the quantum level of like an electron or a photon being split. How does that affect us as human beings? How do you draw the dot from a photon of light to a human? I mean, is it even relevant?
It could be. So it's not just when they originate from the same source. There's also physics that says that if two particles ever interact with each other, then they are entangled from that interaction as well. So you could think of any photon of light or any particle, you know, neutrino, an electron, a photon that comes to us from the sun, for example. As it flows through our body, if it interacts with us in any way, then it's entangled with us. So you could also think of as we as humans come together, if we achieve like enough of a coherent state or enough of a deep bond, you know, a lot of times people can maybe have had this experience where they've had somebody that they really was a loved one in their life and they felt really close with, and then that person maybe was thinking about them, and then they came to their mind, and then all of a sudden that person called them, right? And there's just sort of this almost like a consciousness entanglement that happens there. When we've really connected at deeper levels and interacted, there can be some entanglement of our field, because we're not just these bio machines, we are also energetic beings. You know, we have electromagnetic fields that come out around us. We have biophotonic, you know, photon fields that come out around us. There's all this energy that's happening in our field around us, not just within the physical body itself. And then you can also think even all the way back. I mean, some physicists, like you find this in some of Michio Kaku's work, where he talks about if ultimately every particle came from a Big Bang singularity at the beginning of the universe, then every particle was entangled with everything else that came out of that Big Bang. So, and to some degree, they are still entangled. It's just that now you have this like numbers game. So there's a lot happening and a lot of interactions happening. So, you know, it's like a lot of static or a lot of ripples on the sea these days. So to have a really big effect on that entanglement field, you have to have a bigger wave or bigger impact. And that is only achieved through coherence and a lot of energy. But I do believe that consciousness can achieve that.
Yeah, yeah. I'll share a quick story with you. So my friend in New Zealand was doing special forces selection in the military, and he messaged me, hey, I'm going in, I won't talk to you until I finish, hopefully I pass. And this, it was like 4 days long. And one of the evenings I was going to bed in Australia, and it was about 9 p.m., which made it about midnight in New Zealand. And I sat on the edge of my bed, and I love this work that we're talking about now. And so I sat there and I sort of meditated and prayed and sent him what I wanted him to receive, which was like, keep going, don't give up, you can do this. And I sat there for about 5 minutes, and I was just really in this really beautiful state. I went to bed, and then a few days later, he's like, hey, just finished, I've passed. And he's like, the most bizarre thing happened. He's like, it was midnight, and you just jumped into my head. And he's like, these were his words. I hadn't said anything to him. And he said, it wasn't a thought. He's like, I wasn't thinking of you. He's like, you came in and there was nothing I could do about it. And you were just there supporting me, encouraging me. And I got goosebumps all over my body.
Nice.
Yeah, it was, these are the experiences I've had, which it's not coincidental, and you just
you can't make that up, right?
No.
You don't make stuff up like that. So that's very cool.
Yeah.
Good. Well, you have a good projection of your consciousness then, and the intention and the clarity you had in the meditation, and
yeah. So
that's the kind of stuff you can find more evidence of, for sure.
Well, my question, because I also spent a whole weekend once trying to bend a spoon, but I couldn't do it. And so have you seen anybody that's been able to affect the 3D world in any way like that?
Well, certainly I know there's like Uri Geller is very, very famous and well known, is going around teaching a lot of spoon bending stuff. And so the spoon bending stuff, even my dad did it at one point, and he still has the fork. It's like his prized fork. He didn't bend it, but he twisted it all the way around. And it's all
with his hands.
Well, with the mind, but then you ultimately still had to, help it a little bit, right? You had to help it, but you shouldn't be able to just bend a stainless steel fork, without breaking it or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So for it to have gone into sort of this liquidy, sort of malleable state through consciousness or intent, through just a little bit of sending energy to it, and then be able to just twist it or bend it. That's that's some interesting evidence there. There's I'd have to really go and shift into that mindset of, well, okay, where is that evidence? I know it's there. It's just,
I remember, I think in one of the forewords in Dr. Joe Dispenza's book, Greg Braden said he went into a cave and there was a man that had pressed handprints. Have you heard of that?
I've seen a lot of Greg Braden's work. There's some amazing healing work also that, miraculous healings is probably a really good example of various manifestations. People, you can watch some videos where there's been like Eastern Taoist, Qigong masters that are, doing some chants and healing and intention and sending it into somebody. And you can watch on the ultrasound, the tumor that they're trying to clear, the tumor just reducing to then when there's no more cancer left in a person. So there's definitely that kind of stuff, and it's not placebo effect, right? You can see the physical evidence of that reduction, and that would be pure intention and spirit, and consciousness manifesting a result into the physical. So I think with healing, miraculous healing work, that is probably where you're going to find the most evidence for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. And so that tumor that's shrinking, is it real time or is it over a period of months?
No, it's in real time. I saw a video where it's in real time happening, and they you could see it, as they're working it in just like 30 minutes worth, you can just see it reducing. That's really high power, energy work coming in. But you can also see, lesser cases of that where it's over a couple of months just through intention and visualization, right? But it's really the power of our will and our willingness to discipline our consciousness to go in that direction and not get into the fear.
Is this the same as collapsing the wave function? So intention is to observe the thing differently, and so therefore it becomes different?
We could talk about it as collapsing the wave function. You're using mind to really create a result out of the quantum field of possibilities. Another way of talking about it might be we're shifting consciousness into a parallel timeline or a parallel possible, way in which things unfolded. And so we're just shifting into that new timeline. And those parallel realities are happening all simultaneously right now, right here, inches in front of our nose or millimeters in front of our nose. They're just happening at different frequency levels, different vibrational levels. And some scientists, I don't know that this is really the right answer, but some scientists say that at any moment where you had a choice of, the wave function becomes collapsed in this way or that way, what happens, they call it decoherence, that the reality actually splits into both options. And both exist, but in slightly different frequency levels, they've decohered. And so, you have parallel realities happening. And so you'd have I think it's a bit much because it ends up being infinite parallel realities happening because of all of the infinite, possible ways in which things could manifest. But it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting concept. And that's just coming out of actually the physicists who don't want to believe in spirit are talking about decoherence because they're trying to explain away all the phenomenon that come with the approach of no, consciousness actually does make a difference. We, the observers, do have a participatory role to play, not just a passive role to play in all of this. And so it's pretty fascinating stuff out there.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so to shift timeline, you ultimately just shift your frequency and
your focus on a different reality, maybe.
Yeah, and because people talk about it often, you need to change your vibration. Is that vibration measurable? And how's it measured if it is?
It's measurable through your brain waves, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get deeper and deeper into a meditative state, your brain waves go through measurable shifts from a beta frequency, which is operating at 13 to 35 hertz or beats per second, and the neural oscillations that are going on. And then as you go deeper and deeper in meditation, your brain waves actually slow down. But then your subjective experience tends to be that you're feeling less and less in your body and identity, and more in this unified field, and more connected to spirit, or higher realms, or the visions, the colors, an angelic being, something kind of comes into that visionary experience. So that's one way it's been measured. Another way, again, the GDV that has been developed by Russian scientists, Korotkov, it's also been able to measure energy fields. And when somebody comes into a more coherent state, or they start sending out the healing energy, or they start, doing something that's pushing that spiritual energy out, they can measure significant shifts within the field. And, Joe Dispenza uses some of these devices in his workshops and so forth, where they have a Sputnik and they measure, the shifts in the field, especially when you have a collective entrainment process that's happening between all the people who are there, and they're, all doing this meditation together, they're, doing some, other exercises together, and they're learning how to shift their frequencies. They can detect a difference in the atmosphere of the room, or the vibrational energy of the room.
Okay, cool. Because a lot of people would say that's woo-woo, but science is saying, look, it's measurable. We can measure your vibe.
Right. More and more science is showing that we can measure it. Biophoton fields are another way. Part of the problem, I don't know about in Australia, but in the US, there's not as much of this research happening. They don't fund it, right? So a lot of what research gets done within the mainstream institutions is based on where the money's at and what they'll fund. And that often has to do with either defense money or technology driven money, or, can we make a new startup off of this research, that kind of thing. So it's very money driven. But in Europe and in Russia and even in like Japan and some other parts of Asia, they are more interested in some of these alternative things, and they've done quite a lot of research on biophotons, for example, or you even have both in Russia and even the CIA, they did a lot of experiments at one point around telekinesis and remote viewing and all of these types of things, and they've verified that it's real, that it is a real phenomenon. And so it's just, the evidence is there if you want to look for it.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Nikola Tesla said along the lines of, we'll make 10 times the advancements, in the next year that we have in the last 100 years if we look at energy, vibration,
non-physical things versus just physical.
Yeah.
Energy, vibration, frequency. Yeah.
I'm excited for that to happen.
And a lot of this is, if people are subscribed to Gaia, they can go and check out my mystery teaching series, especially season 1 and season 2. We really get into a lot of the science behind it all. Greg Braden stuff, Joe Dispenza stuff, Bruce Lipton stuff. It's all there. Like it's there to be discovered for people who want to explore more into it. But if you're just doing Google searching or just trying to find it on YouTube, you're gonna have a much more mixed bag, because there's a lot of it's less vetted. Let's just say that. Anyone can say whatever they want on those forums.
Yeah, I think that's a really great thing. Team, if you're not on Gaia, it's if you know Netflix, it's the Netflix for people that want to understand this world that we're talking about now. And if you're listening to this and enjoying this, I would highly recommend you get to Gaia and watch Theresa's series, Mystery Teachings. I love it. I've watched it twice now, and I highly recommend you do that. So I know we don't have too much longer left, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the Hermetic Principles. And I think to lead into it, can you explain a little bit about the Hermetic teachings? And then I'll have some questions, I'm sure.
Okay, so the Hermetic teachings are said to go all the way back to Hermes Trismegistus, which is maybe as far as 8,000 years back. And Hermes was said to be like this man or god of wisdom, who brought us science and study of the stars, like astronomy, astrology, alchemy, writing. He brought a lot of the wisdom and the mathematics and the sacred geometries and so forth to humanity. And so the Hermetic teachings are the oral teachings that have been passed down through that Hermetic lineage. And they so in the Western mystery school tradition and in the modern mystery school especially, we really dig pretty deeply into these teachings. And so we work with things like the Corpus Hermeticum, where there's a book called the Hermetica. You also have things like the Asclepius chapters. You have the Divine Pymander. You have more recent Hermetic teachings were written down in a book called the Kybalion, which is about the 7 Hermetic Principles, written by 3 initiates. They don't really give their names, but 3 initiates of the Western Mystery School lineage. And, I find that Hermetic teachings can go really, really spiritual, but very deep, very alchemical. So like a lot of, actually science came out of the tradition of alchemy. And so the alchemists were the original scientists, but they were also their whole teaching and how as a formula, and we can work with that formula to speed it up. So we're in the Hermetic teachings. Did all that come through?
It was a bit broken up, so I'm going to ask. Can you say it again, please?
Yeah, no problem.
I got it. I think it was when we started talking about the original scientists were alchemists and how it kind of transitioned.
Yeah. So those original scientists were from alchemy, right? They were alchemists, and the alchemists based much of their framework on Hermetic teachings, as well as observing nature and seeing that there's this pattern, this formula of transformation in nature that drives and guides evolution. And that if we can learn what those rules are, what that flow and that pattern of nature is, then we, in our creative, divine abilities, and our intelligence, we can engage with it, we can learn to harness it, and we can therefore speed it up. So that's the premise of alchemy, but it's also, where science and medicine and all of these things emerged from. So yeah, the Hermetic teachings are very deep, very vast, but also scientific in their way of understanding the universe and nature and us.
Yeah, and do we know where Hermes got his information from?
Well, Hermes was said to be like a priest or an initiate of the Egyptian mysteries, all the way back to Thoth. Thoth was said to be the god of wisdom from the ancient family of Ra, which were probably extraterrestrials that came and visited and helped humanity to make a leap in
I think they
knowledge
need
and
to. I
advancement.
think they need to come back and help us again.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe they already are. They're just not ready to make a mass appearance just yet.
Yes, I do hope so.
But
And
Hermes also was said to have these conversations with something called Poimander, which was like mind, the mind of the one mind, the mind of the universe. And so some of it was also spiritual visions and downloads that he then just transmitted to his students. So it's a
yeah,
little bit of both.
yeah, and can we follow? Because I know of the Emerald tablets. Can we
Mhm.
follow it back? Or I feel like there's a bit of history missing. That's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
say. Like, can
there is.
where did it go? Where did that gap go between these ancient teachings and where we are with the modern world?
Well, they didn't really disappear. They just went underground. And there's reasons for that. So the Western mystery school tradition, you also have Eastern, you have different mystery school traditions, but the lineage that I come from, the Western mystery school tradition, it was always an oral tradition, right? So oral meaning we're gathered in person, sharing physical and auric space, and from the mouth of the teacher to the ear of the student, the teachings, the hidden teachings are revealed. But sometimes that's not just about knowledge being revealed, it's about the energy being transmitted, it's about the experience, it's about, you can only really come to understand it by experiencing it directly, and you have to be kind of there in person, going through a process, being guided. You can't just read it out of a book. So with the oral teachings and these ancient traditions, for a long time, it was through storytelling or maybe mythology, sort of the myths and legends and fairy tales that we told along the way. Sometimes it was through song. Other times it was directly through the teachings. But there were times on the planet, especially in the Western, in Europe and so forth, where it was not safe to be open about, believing something different from what the dogma of the church was saying, right? So they had times of inquisition and witch hunts and all kinds of stuff that drove these types of teachings underground. So, and then history is written by the victors. So when you're relying on history to tell you the story, well, there are chapters that are written out of history because certain powers that be don't want people to know about that, and so they just erase it from history. You could even see that all the way back to ancient, like Egypt, where you had they kept a lot of records of like the pharaohs and the priesthood and so forth, and who was what and what was their legacy and so forth. But there was a couple pharaohs or kings or queens who were maybe not popular with the establishment of the priesthood or whoever, the politicians, whatever. And then as they got chased out or even assassinated, they were then chipped off of the walls that recorded their existence or their legacy. And then in later dynasties, they weren't, they wrote new ones, but they left them out. So this is not a new thing to have these gaps in history, and we have to sort of find the little puzzle pieces and put them together. But within the mystery school traditions, the oral teachings have been preserved. It's just that they were underground for a while. They weren't accessible because people weren't quite ready, or the society wasn't ready. Even if people were ready, it's just like there wasn't a level of tolerance that was needed. But now they're coming out again. And we're living in a very fortunate time on the planet where we do have access to these ancient spiritual teachings, and not just the teachings, we have access to the path of initiation, the empowerments that come from that, the awakenings, the activations. There's all kinds of tools and empowerments that we can take advantage of at this time in the planet, because the doors have been opened again for access to these mystery teachings and initiations.
And what would you recommend to someone who is listening and was curious about this stuff? What are the profound changes you think when you train people, when you take them through your teachings, what are the profound changes people can expect from understanding this wisdom?
Wow. Well, it's not something to expect. It's something to come forward to with an open mind. And, I have almost no expectation, like I'm empty. I'm just coming knowing I need to be here, right? So I'm open, I'm ready to receive whatever that is. And then when they receive those teachings, but it's actually, the teachings really help shift our mind and open it up to possibilities we never had even considered before. And once your mind starts to get opened up to other possibilities, it's like a slew of questions start coming out. And then that slew of questions, and there's this thirst to know more, and it kind of propels you forward to seek even deeper answers. So that right there just expands your mind and expands the possibilities. And, you start to shift your identity of who you are, because what you thought reality was about, now you're realizing, oh my gosh, there's this whole other dimension to things. And so who am I now in relationship to that? And if you can start realigning your identity with higher possibilities, that changes everything in terms of what you think is possible in your life. And then when you also take that even further with tools of empowerment and practices that you can do to help you learn how to harness your energy, how to strengthen your ability to affect the process of manifestation, when you can open your consciousness up to receiving higher guidance, and you're not just operating anymore from a personality level of thing or indoctrinated level of programming, you start to break free, right? So I find that these tools and this path of initiation actually sets you free to really be who you are, and to, as you mentioned before, experiencing the magic of life and the magic of that transformational journey and the healing process. And it's not always easy, right? Going through some of that healing and digging into some of the darker aspects of the self so that we can move past them can be, challenging. But when you do, it's like you're liberating yourself from those influences of your past, and it's like the whole world of possibility opens up to you from that point on.
Yeah, I asked that question with a purpose, and you nailed it, because when I take people through coaching and we go through values work, and some people want money, some people want relationships, and when you go like, why, what's the purpose, almost everybody gets, they just want freedom. And you said it, you're like, you liberate yourself and you become free. And I've experienced it myself. And I think true freedom is not about anything tangible. It is a way of being. And when you said that, it kind of confirmed it for me. And so again, I recommend anybody that's listening to go and connect with Dr. Theresa Bullard, because freedom, which is truly your highest value, I know it, I secretly know it, can be done through the work that she does. And so I've got one more question for you before we round this up, which is,
Okay.
I feel like everything is pointing back towards oneness, but I also understand in the 3D world, we have polarity and duality. How do you personally deal with that? Are we living in a world of survival? Are we living in a world of oneness? Are we living in both at the same time? And it's just probably you shouldn't think about it.
Well, yeah, I guess that depends on where your perspective of who you are is, right? So if your perspective of who you are is coming from that eternal spirit, that eternal being, then we're living in a world of oneness, and we're just, here in a virtual reality simulator having an experience, right? But your true self is back there in that oneness. If your identity is wrapped up in who I am is this body, this life, then you're going to be living in an experience of duality. Now, why are we here in this experience? Well, I think that duality gives us opportunity for contrast, opportunity to learn. We have some level of necessity and also opportunity and freedom to choose. How are we going to, are we going to choose to do things that are going to lead towards our progression and towards the fulfillment of our dreams and our joy and our love and our passion and the things that we really hope for in the depths of our being? Or are we going to choose to do things that are driven by fear, driven by anger, driven by, doubts or insecurities? Like, where are we coming from? Are we coming from our higher self? Are we coming from our lower self? And those choices lead to results. And those results, feed back to us. Was that really a good choice or not so good choice, right? So we learn from that, and hopefully we'll come to a certain level of maturity. Hopefully we'll come to a certain level of empathy and deeper understanding, and maybe even down the line wisdom, if we really start making better choices. And like you are and I am, we've really tapped into where that core sense of joy and freedom is coming from. And when we have that and we're so grateful for that, then we want to help other people have that too. We want to serve in some way and help awaken others to that empowerment and that possibility for themselves. And through that process of service, and helping others in that way to be empowered, there's more wisdom that comes from that, right? So it's, we're meant to be transcending the duality while being faced by the duality at the same time. We're meant to find the balance point, the middle way between the two. It's not all this, it's not all that. And rise above this dualistic thinking of us versus them and separation and, all the things that we see really ruling our world right now, that just create more chaos, right? So we need to find the balance point between them.
Beautiful. I think that is a fantastic way to wrap up this episode. So for everyone that has got to the end of this journey with us, to follow Dr. Theresa Bullard, the best place is to go to her website, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but theresabullard.com.
Yep.
And that is
Theresa with an H, Theresa Bullard. Yep.
.com. And you know what, get excited, because later this year she's bringing out her book, which is full of what we've talked about today. Is that true?
Yeah, it's going to be related to a lot of what I delivered during the season 1 of Mystery Teachings. It's all about the deep physics and the metaphysics, a lot of the Hermetics and Kabbalah and Alchemy, and how they weave together to help us really understand how to make that shift in consciousness towards a more quantum paradigm, a new paradigm. And it's a journey of discovery along the way that really tries to synthesize this whole theory of bridging science and spirituality together. So right now the working title is, we're looking at summer 2021 as a release date, and the working title at the moment is Through the Hologram, A Portal to Quantum Consciousness.
Ooh, sounds juicy.
Yeah.
So team, head to the website, subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get notified when the book's out. Grab a copy of the book, because it will lead you, it will open you up, as she said herself. So I just want to thank you personally for joining us here today, and really for your time and just sharing years and years and years of wisdom. So thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure. And you asked very, very insightful questions. So
Awesome.
Very good. Yeah, thank you.